This movie is about functions, logical functions, that all have to do with whether something's true or false, starting with the and function, the or, the not, the if function, which allows for several alternatives, the if error, which again allows for several alternatives, and then the false and the true function. So logical functions. Logical functions evaluate to either true or false. The AND function allows you to string together expressions, up to 255 expressions, that when all of them are true, the AND function will return a result of true. If but one of them is false, the AND function will return a result of false, even if all of the other expressions are true. So an AND function, and using IntelliSense, and there it is, tab to enter the AND function into the cell. The first argument is a logical expression, and I'm going to build a simple AND function by testing whether the content in cell F11 equals the content in cell F12, comma, to go to the next argument. I'm going to do the same thing for G, comma, the same thing for H, and enter. Since each one of those expressions is true, the AND function evaluates to true. If I change a value so that one of those expressions is false, the AND function evaluates to false. The AND function is very useful for stringing together other logical expressions using other logical functions. So you can test many conditions at the same time. The OR function will return a value true if any of the expressions are true. So if I build an OR function, equal OR, tab, my first expression is going to be F11 equal F12, comma, the next argument is for column G, and again for column H, enter. The OR function resolves to true because all three of those expressions resolve to true. But I can make this one resolve to false, and the OR function still resolves to true, and this one resolve to false. So two of them are false, but as long as one of the expressions in the OR function is true, it'll resolve to true. All of the expressions have to be false for the OR function to resolve to false. So if at least one of the expressions in the OR function is true, the OR function returns a value of true. If all of the expressions are false, then the OR function returns a value of false. And again, like in the AND function, you can mix and match these functions, and you can embed OR functions with AND functions and vice versa, so that you can have these formulas built with these functions testing all sorts of conditions. The NOT function reverses the result of another logical statement, another logical function. So I have an AND function here that resolves to true. I can input the NOT function in front of it, parentheses there, control enter, and make it resolve to false. This does reiterate the fact that you can use the logical functions in conjunction with one another. The if function is one of the most useful functions in Excel. It allows you to make a logical test and then have the if function return a result if that test is true, or an alternative result if the test is false. You can also construct nested if statements, and you can construct up to 64 of them. Don't ever do that, by the way, because there's an easier way to generate a result that a nested if statement will give you by using either the lookup, the VLOOKUP, HLOOKUP, or choose function. But I'm going to show you how to construct a nested if statement anyway. But first, the regular if statement. Let's say these are test scores, and some of them are horrible test scores, but let's say we've determined that it's a pass-fail test, and anything above 50 is a pass, and below is a fail. So we can start our function building with equal if, tab the function into the cell. I want to determine whether the result in column D is greater than 50. So that's my logical test, comma, if the value is true, I want the result to be pass, and if the value is false, I want the result to be fail. I'm going to enter, select that drag down, and I've got my result. Let's say instead we want to build a 10-point grading scale, and we want to build an if statement to give us the result, the grade, for these tests. I'm going to use IntelliSense equal if tab to begin my first if statement. The logical test is going to be if the grade is greater than 90, comma, then I want the grade to be an A. Comma, the alternative, if the value is not greater than 90, will be another if statement. So the second if statement begins if, left parentheses, another logical test, if instead, really is what we're saying, the grade is greater than 80, comma, then the grade is a B, comma, beginning another if statement, left parentheses, if the grade is greater than 70, comma, I want the grade to be a C, comma, I've done yet one more if statement. The next thing we do is to provide the alternative if none of those conditions are met. And that is going to be the grade's going to be an F. And for this particular test, there's a lot of F's. The last thing we need to do is close the parentheses on the right side of all the if statements, because along the way, we've opened up a bunch of left parentheses and sequentially established these embedded or nested if statements. Well, now I need to close them. I've got 4 if statements, so I need 4 parentheses, 1, 2, 3, 4. The last thing I want to point out is the order that I did this, the order that I built these nested if statements in, is important. Once the condition is satisfied, the if statement stops evaluating. So when I began the if statement, I began at the top of the grading scale, so that 90 and above is an A, because obviously 90 and above includes values that are also 80 and above. But since I began the evaluation at the top of the grading scale, once the function evaluates the cell and finds a condition that matches these nested if statements, it'll stop evaluating. So Control Enter, grabbing the fill handle and dragging down, and clicking off so we can read it a little bit better, we have the result. 82 is a B. That, of course, is an F, as is that. That's an A. That's a D. That's a B, and so on. The other thing to be aware of when you're building nested if statements is what we did is do the test and then generate a result if the test was true, comma, and then we started another if statement, that if that condition was true, we would have a result, comma, another if statement. If that condition is true, comma, we would have a result. And at the end of it, comma, we'd have the result if none of those things were true, which in this case is a grade of F. So the argument for each of the if statements, if the logical test evaluates to false, is another if statement. If you're watching this movie in its entirety, we just covered if statements, and if error is sort of just a twist on an if statement. So the if error function is another one of the functions that you really need to know and use. This is one of the ways to get rid of error messages from showing up on your formulas, because many times when you get them, you don't really want the error messages to show on your output. This function was introduced in Excel 2007. It was designed to replace the if-is error, and it's a lot easier to use. So I'm going to go into this cell and use IntelliSense to build an if error tab, a value, and I'm going to divide by 0, which is going to produce an error, and comma, if that value produces an error, I'm going to have a blank cell. Closing with the parentheses, Control Enter, I get rid of the error message, because otherwise, if I was dividing by 0, I would see that. And my if error function, if it doesn't resolve to an error, will just give me the result of the argument called value. So there are really only 2 alternatives. Either the value, the argument called value, generates an error, or it doesn't. if it doesn't generate an error, the if-error function will return that value. If it does generate an error, you have an alternative as to what value you want the function to return. The false-true functions were provided by Microsoft to provide compatibility with other spreadsheet programs. But you can actually use these to generate a result that is either true or false. You don't necessarily need these functions to do that, and I'll show you that in a second. But you can use the function, for instance, and I'm going to use another if-error function. If that value divided by this value is an error, comma, then false. And false is one of those functions that does not require an argument. Control Enter. And so when the value that's in the if-error function is an error, my return value for the if-error function is false. And if it's not an error, it will return the value. But the true-false function actually equals the word false, Control Enter, making that a 0 again. I still get false. So you don't need the false function or the true function to actually generate this result. The word false and the false function and a text string that says false all equal each other. Equal this, equal this, equal this. And is that true? It is true. So those are the logical functions. Logical functions return a result that's either true or false. We looked at the AND function that evaluates a string of logical expressions that will return a result of true if all of the expressions are true. If one of them is false, then the AND function will return a result of false. Then we looked at the OR function that will return a result of true if only one of the logical expressions is true. The NOT function inverts the result that you would otherwise get. False becomes true, true becomes false. The IF function allows you to evaluate an expression and return one result if the condition is true and another result if the condition is false. The if error is sort of a refinement on that idea, where if the expression evaluates to an error, you could have the expression generate a result, and if it's not an error, it'll generate the value of that expression. And the true-false functions are functions that don't require any arguments that basically equal the words true and false.